Star Wars 7x7 episode 2600. Yeah, 2600. How about that? So we got to talk about Crosshair and that inhibitor chip and uncomfortable conversations that happen as a result of the finale of The Bad Batch. So here we go. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So let's recap what we know about the whole inhibitor chip situation as it pertains to Crosshair. In the very first episode of The Bad Batch, that would be Aftermath of course, Order 66 is given, and it affects only Crosshair. The rest of the clones of Clone Force 99 are not affected by it at all. They're puzzled, frankly, by it. They don't quite understand it. And of course, they don't get it because the programming is in there for what Order 66 actually means, but because it's not triggering the inhibitor chip, they don't understand what Order 66 is at all. But once Governor Tarkin realizes that the inhibitor chip has triggered in Crosshair, even if it hasn't triggered in the other clones of Clone Force 99, he asks Nala Se if the programming can be intensified, and she says yes. And so he goes into a tube, and you get to see a procedure happening where he's gone, right, and totally getting amped up with whatever it is, just. Yeah, that's one of those things where don't question that too closely. Just, go with it. Anyway, by the end of the episode, there is a showdown where the rest of the Bad Batch is trying to get off of Kamino, and Crosshair is leading a squad of troopers to stop them and is going to kill them if they don't surrender. What we don't yet know about Crosshair, though, is that there is still some sort of underlying loyalty that he feels to the members of the Bad Batch, and we'll get to that. But in this particular case, he's trying to get them to stand down and surrender, and, what he would have actually done with them if they had surrendered, yeah, that's, an open question. Maybe he would have said, yeah, turn them over to Nala Se and the rest of them and try and see if they can get on board with this whole Empire thing or not. That probably is what would have happened, or what, Tarkin and Nala Se would have tried to do. They probably would have tried to activate the inhibitor chips within them. But of course, that's not what happens. Instead, we jump ahead to episode 7, which is Battle Scars, and we get to see the rest of the Bad Batch getting their inhibitor chips out. And it's important to flag because in case you don't remember, and I didn't necessarily remember for sure, I had to watch it back, it's the right side of the head where they have to go in and take out the inhibitor chips. And that matches up with the diagnostic that they were doing on Crosshair back in episode 1, like when they were showing sort of the, X-ray type thing, they're showing it, from the right side of his head. So yeah, that's where those things are removed. But then of course Crosshair shows up in Reunion, which is episode 8, and in the midst of everything that happens when he tries to have them burned out of that engine cell toward the end, and they blow the cap off the engine cell. I'm using very technical terms, of course. So Crosshair gets caught in the engine wash, and we see that just about his entire head is bandaged. Like he slams his head and he's got some sort of, burn scarring, something or other, to the point where he is almost entirely head bandaged in that episode. The next time we see him is in episode 11. That's Devil's Deal. That's the one that is the first of the two-parter on Ryloth. And that episode, we do see him with his helmet off, and we see scar tissue on the right side of his head. Now, the scar tissue admittedly looks different from anything else that we've seen, right? It looks more like the scar tissue that's over Wrecker's left ear that has been in place for a while and has nothing to do with the inhibitor chip thing. Like, it doesn't look like an operation scar or anything like that. But the point I want to raise with that is that in episode 8 in Reunion, before Crosshair gets injured from that engine wash, his scalp is fine. Like, there's no visible scar on there. I mean, I've watched it back and I can't see a scar on there. So when he had his inhibitor chip out is still a mystery. And of course he says, it doesn't matter in that final episode of the season, but I guess it stands to reason that when he was getting medical treatment for his injuries after the events of that episode on Braca, that would be a likely time for him to have had his inhibitor chip removed. But the question is, who would have done it for him and why? Certainly Tarkin had already left things in the hands of Rampart, and so he wouldn't have been asking questions about inhibitor chips or anything like that. So, maybe Crosshair was able to go to Nala Se and say, pull out my inhibitor chip, I don't need it anymore, or maybe it was malfunctioning as a result of everything that happened. That's still a bit of a mystery, but it does seem like, from a medical procedure standpoint, between episodes 8 and 11 seems like the likely thing. That being said, the big reveal, the big twist in episode 16, in that final episode, is that the inhibitor chip is not responsible for Crosshair's dedication to the Empire. And we kind of talked about this a little bit already when we were talking about Order 66 in a previous episode of the show a couple weeks back, and exploring the notion of, what does Order 66 actually do for the clones. And it seems like it is very Jedi specific because of the fact that it triggered Wrecker on Bracca when they were talking about a Jedi and letting the Padawan go, right? It was like right in that moment that he flipped out and said, you're in violation of Order 66. And Hauser on Ryloth, you'll recall, was actually sympathetic to and supportive of Cham Syndulla and his family, and also of the Order 60, not the Clone Force 99 clones. So he was not being swayed by Order 66 at that time, and that's because there were no Jedi around. So instead, we find out that this is an outgrowth of the severe and unyielding personality of Crosshair, as Tech describes him. And, I gotta tell you, it's really hard not to see this in a political context right now. I mean, yes, Star Wars has always been political. Period, paragraph, end of story. It is absolutely not apolitical and certainly draws on historical events. It's really hard not to see this particular dynamic as being very reflective of the times in which we find ourselves right now. And especially so, and tragically so, when you get that line from Crosshair where he talks about the Empire building something amazing in the galaxy and he wants to be a part of it. And this is after the Empire has totally destroyed Tipoca City and utterly laid waste to the Kaminoans, made the clones disappear, and for all intents and purposes, left him for dead. And adding to the difficulty of the conversation is the fact that, people around us are family, even when they have these incredibly different points of view that are so extreme in their differences that there's no brooking the divide between them. And additionally, when people on both sides are actually capable of good things. I mean, for Crosshair, going to the incredibly fascist authoritarian Empire side of the house and deciding that's where he wants to throw his weight and his passion and his skills and abilities, he also saves Omega. And that, for me at least, was the most compelling thing to come out of the Bad Batch for season 1. And I'd love to know what you think about that. Was it the most compelling thing for you as well, or was there some other aspect of season 1 of the Bad Batch that you thought was most compelling? Please chime in wherever you have access to a comment section related to the episode, like on YouTube, for example, or at home base for the show at sw7x7.com. I would love to hear your thoughts. And that is going to do it for today's episode of the show. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.